Are you watching this at night? If you are, you might want to check the corners of your room and make sure your windows are closed. Out here on the reservation, the elders say the night has its own rules, and the most important is this: never look too long at a stranger's face after dark. Some faces aren't really faces at all. My name is Noah, and I'm a tribal police officer. I've spent years patrolling these roads, answering calls that never make it into the official reports. I've seen things that would make most people leave and never come back. But nothing haunts me more than the warnings the elders whispered when I was a kid. Beware the faceless. If you see them, don't speak. Don't follow. And whatever you do, don't let them know you've noticed. I used to think those were just stories, old superstitions meant to keep us in line, to scare us into coming home before the streetlights flickered on. But the longer I've worn this badge, the more I've realized that some stories are warnings, and some warnings are the only thing keeping you alive. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the night I stopped laughing at the old stories. That night I learned what happens when you ignore the elders, when you break the rules and look too long at something you shouldn't see. If you think you're safe just because you're inside, think again. The faceless don't care about locks or walls. And once you've seen them, they never really leave you alone. Some things on this land are older than memory, and some faces are better left unseen. I never thought I'd come back to the reservation. After high school, I left for the city, chasing a life with bright lights and straight answers. I wanted to be a cop where the rules were clear, where every problem had a form to fill out and every threat could be cuffed and booked. For a while, I convinced myself I belonged there, patrolling city blocks, learning to read the language of sirens and streetlights, pretending the old stories from home were just that, stories. But the city has a way of wearing you down. The noise never stops, and the faces blur together until you forget your own. When my father died last winter, suddenly, quietly, in the same house where he'd raised me, I found myself packing up my life and driving west, the highway stretching out like a scar across the desert. I told myself I was coming back for my mother, for family, for duty. But deep down, I think I was running from something I couldn't name. The reservation greeted me with silence and wind. The land here is wide and restless, dotted with scattered homes, old trucks, and the kind of darkness that feels alive. At night, the stars are so bright they almost hurt your eyes, and the only sounds are the coyotes and the distant thump of drums from a family gathering. People here don't waste words. They watch, they remember, and they know who belongs and who doesn't. I took the job as a tribal police officer partly out of obligation, partly out of guilt. My uncle, who'd worn the badge for decades, said the community needed someone who understood both worlds, someone who could speak the language of the law and the language of the land. I wasn't sure I was that person, but I said yes anyway. Maybe I was running from the city, or maybe I was running towards something I'd left behind. The first week back, I felt like a stranger. The radio codes were different, the roads less forgiving, and the rules, well, the rules were older than any law I'd learned in the academy. Here, the line between the living and the dead, the real and the impossible, was thin as a shadow, and I was about to learn just how thin it could get. On my third night back, I found myself in the old station kitchen, pouring burnt coffee into a chipped mug, when Sergeant Yazzie came in. He was one of those men who seemed carved from the land itself, quiet, steady, and older than he looked. He nodded at me, then at the battered binder on the table. "Have you read the protocols yet?" he asked, voice low. I shrugged. I've seen the manual. Some of it sounds more like superstition than police work. Yazzy's eyes narrowed. I drove the back roads with the window cracked, letting in the scent of sage and dust, telling myself that the old rules were just a way to keep people cautious. I was a cop, not a believer in ghost stories. Around midnight, dispatch crackled to life. Unit 7, welfare check. Caller reports someone standing in the road near the old trading post. No description, just standing there. I acknowledged and turned onto the gravel road, headlights bouncing over ruts. The trading post had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded and its sign faded to a ghost of itself. As I approached, I saw a figure in the distance, illuminated by my high beams. They stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, facing away from me. I slowed the cruiser, heart thumping, and reached for the radio. This is Unit 7, I have a visual. Approaching now. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, flashlight in hand. Hello? Are you all right? Do you need help? The figure didn't move. I drew closer, the beam of my light trembling just a little. The person was tall, dressed in a long coat, hair hanging loose. Something about the way they stood made my skin crawl. I circled around, trying to get a look at their face. That's when I saw it. There was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just smooth, pale skin where a face should be. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought it was a mask, a trick of the light. I took a step closer, and the figure turned toward me, moving in a way that was too fluid, too silent. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to speak. Are you hurt? Can you hear me? The Faceless tilted its head, as if listening, and then I heard it, a whisper, not from its mouth, but from everywhere at once. My name, spoken in a dozen voices, some I recognized, some I didn't. I stumbled back, fumbling for my radio. Unit 7 requesting backup. Possible. The words died in my throat as the figure glided toward the edge of the road, melting into the shadows between the sage and the fence line. The air felt suddenly colder, the night pressing in on all sides. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a trick, a prank, maybe a lost hiker in a mask. But the footprints left behind were wrong, bare, but with no toes, no heel, just smooth impressions in the dust. I followed them a few steps, but they vanished after a few yards, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. Back in the cruiser, I locked the doors and sat in the glow of the dashboard lights, hands shaking. I didn't write up the full story in my report. I said I found no one, that the road was empty when I arrived. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had seen me, that something was waiting for me to break the rules. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept seeing that blank, shifting face every time I closed my eyes. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just nerves. But deep down, I knew the Elder's warnings weren't just stories. I'd seen the Faceless, and I'd come too close to letting it know I was watching. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had all been a trick of the night, a mask, a prank, a shadow playing games with my tired mind. But the memory of that blank face and the way my name had echoed in the darkness wouldn't let me go. I barely slept, and when I got to the station, Yazzie was already there, flipping through the overnight reports. He looked up, eyes sharp. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. I hesitated, then told him what I'd seen. He listened without interruption, then nodded slowly. "You did the right thing, not getting too close. The faceless don't like to be noticed. But once you see them, they remember you." Before I could ask what he meant, the phone rang. Dispatch relayed a call from the east side of the reservation. A family reporting strange marks on their house and a missing uncle who'd gone out after dark and never returned. Yazzie and I drove out together, the truck rattling over washboard roads, the sky heavy with clouds. The family's house sat alone at the edge of a dry arroyo, wind chimes clattering in the breeze. The mother, Lena, met us at the door, her face drawn and tired. "It started 3 nights ago," she said. "We heard footsteps around the house, but when we looked, there was no one there. Then we found these." She led us to the back porch, where strange symbols had been drawn in the dust, circles, spirals, and what looked like faces with no features at all. Yazzie knelt, tracing one of the marks with his finger. "Old signs," he murmured. "Warnings or invitations. Depends on who left them." Inside, the family was tense. The children clung to their grandmother, who whispered prayers under her breath. The missing uncle, David, had left after dinner to check on a noise by the shed. He never came back. They found his flashlight in the dirt, still on, shining at nothing. We searched the property, finding more of the strange marks on the windowsills, the doors, even the hood of David's truck. No footprints, no sign of a struggle, just the symbols and a cold, heavy feeling in the air. I tried to keep my questions practical. Had they seen anyone nearby? Any strangers? Any animals acting strangely? But the answers were always the same. Nothing but the feeling of being watched, the sense that something was waiting just out of sight. That night, we set up a watch at the house. Yazzie and I sat in the living room, lights off, listening to the wind rattle the windows. The hours crawled by, the only sound the ticking of the old clock and the distant howl of coyotes. Just after 2, we heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping on the glass. 3 times, then silence. Yazzie gripped my arm, shaking his head. "Don't move. Don't look." The tapping came again, louder this time, followed by a whisper, my name, spoken in a voice that sounded like my father's. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to turn and look. The air grew colder, the shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, and the old woman began to pray louder, her words a shield against whatever pressed in from the dark. When the sun finally rose, the tapping stopped. We checked the windows and found new marks. This time, a single perfect handprint with no lines, no fingerprints, just a smooth, blank palm pressed into the glass. The family was shaken, but grateful we'd stayed. Lena pressed a small pouch of herbs into my hand. "For protection," she said. "The elders say the faceless can't cross a line of sage and salt." Back at the station, Yazzie and I started digging through old case files. We found stories going back decades, people vanishing after seeing a stranger with no face, houses marked with the same symbols, families haunted by whispers and tapping at the windows. Each report was different, but the warnings were always the same. Don't look, don't answer, don't let them know you see. We visited other families, listening to their stories. An old man told us about the time he'd seen the faceless as a boy, how his mother had smeared ash on the doors and windows to keep them away. A young woman described dreams of blank faces watching her from the edge of the woods, dreams that left her waking in terror. The deeper we dug, the more we realized that the faceless weren't just a story. They were a pattern, a presence woven into the land itself. But the more we learned, the more dangerous it felt. The marks started appearing at the station, on the cruiser, on the back door, even on my own window at home. I started hearing whispers at night, voices calling my name, sometimes in the voice of my father, sometimes on my own. Yazzie grew quieter, more watchful, burning sage in every room and carrying a pouch of salt in his pocket. One evening, as we left the station, Yazzie stopped me. "The faceless know we're looking for them now. The elders say the more you notice, the more they notice you. We need help, real help. Someone who remembers the old ways." I nodded, feeling the weight of every story, every warning, every mark left in the dust. The deeper we dug, the more I realized we were in over our heads. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the faceless were getting closer, waiting for us to make one wrong move. After that week, the faceless stopped being a story and became a shadow that followed me everywhere. I tried to keep my routine, patrols, paperwork, radio checks, but the sense of being watched never left. Every time I passed a window after sunset, I caught myself glancing at the glass, half expecting to see a blank face staring back. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was letting the stories get to me. But deep down, I knew something had changed. It started with the dreams. I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard someone tapping at the window. Sometimes it was my father's voice, soft and pleading, asking me to let him in. Other times it was Yazzie, or my mother, or even my own voice, echoing through the darkness. I'd sit up in bed, sweat cold on my skin, listening to the silence press in around me. One night, the tapping was real. 3 slow, heavy raps on my bedroom window just after midnight. I froze, every muscle tense, remembering Yazzie's warning. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock and the sound of my own breathing. Then came the voice, my mother's, as clear as if she were standing outside. "Noah, it's me. I forgot my keys. Let me in, son." My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to call anyone. I knew what I was supposed to do. Nothing. Don't answer. Don't speak. Don't even move. But the urge to open the window was overwhelming, a pull that felt almost physical. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes fixed on the glass, and waited. The voice changed, growing more desperate, more insistent. "Please, Noah. I'm cold. I need you." I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering a prayer I barely remembered from childhood. The tapping stopped, replaced by a scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the glass. Then silence. The next morning, I found marks in the dust outside my window, bare, but wrong, the shape not quite human. My aunt, who lived next door, saw me staring at them and crossed the yard, her face pale. "You heard it, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "It comes for all of us sooner or later. You have to see the medicine man. You have to ask for protection." I wanted to argue, to insist that I could handle it, that I was a cop and this was just another case. But my training meant nothing here. No amount of logic or evidence could explain what was happening. The rules I'd learned in the academy were useless against something that could wear my mother's voice like a mask. That night, I called my sister just to hear a real voice, something warm and alive. She answered on the second ring, her laughter a lifeline. We talked about nothing, her kids, the weather, old memories of our father. As we said goodbye, her tone shifted. "Be careful, Noah. Don't look at anyone's face after dark. Not even mine." I promised I wouldn't. But as I hung up, I realized how thin the line was between the world I thought I knew and the one pressing in from the dark. I needed help, real help. The kind that came from the old ways, from people who understood that some faces should never be seen, no matter how much you want to believe they're safe. The next morning, I drove out to the far edge of the reservation, where the land rose into low hills and the cottonwoods grew thick along the creek. I parked by a weathered house with blue trim and a line of prayer flags fluttering in the wind. Yazzie had given me the address, saying only, "She'll know what to do." I took a deep breath and knocked, feeling strangely nervous. The door opened to reveal an old woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You're Noah," she said, not asking. "Come in. I've been expecting you." The house smelled of sage and cedar. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, and the walls were covered in old photographs and woven blankets. She motioned for me to sit by the fire. I told her everything: the tapping, the voices, the marks, the fear that clung to me even in daylight. She listened without interruption, nodding as if she'd heard it all before. When I finished, she stirred the fire and began to speak in a low, rhythmic voice, half in English, half in Navajo. "There are things on this land that remember before we were here. They know our names, our faces, our weaknesses. They test us, especially those who forget the old ways." She handed me a pouch filled with corn pollen and a small carved stone. "For protection. Keep them with you. Tonight we'll do a ceremony. You must not speak, no matter what you hear. The Faceless will try to trick you, but you must hold fast." As dusk fell, she led me outside to a clearing ringed with stones. She built a small fire and began to chant, sprinkling corn pollen in a circle around us. The air grew heavy, the shadows deepening as the sun disappeared. I felt the old fear rise, but I stayed silent, clutching the pouch and stone. The wind picked up, carrying voices, my mother, my sister, even Yazzie, calling my name from the darkness. I clenched my jaw, remembering the old woman's warning. The chanting grew louder, the fire flaring bright, and for a moment, I saw shapes moving at the edge of the circle, tall, thin, shifting like smoke, their faces blank and shifting. Then, as suddenly as it began, the wind died and the voices faded. The old woman finished the chant and pressed her hand to my shoulder. "You did we. They know you're protected now, but you must respect the rules. Never look at the Faceless. Never speak to the voices. And always remember, some things are older than any badge." Driving home, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. I tucked the pouch and stone into my jacket, the scent of sage lingering in the air. For the first time, I understood that survival here meant more than just following the law. It meant honoring the old ways, blending them with what I knew, and trusting that sometimes the only way to stay safe was to listen to those who came before. The days after the ceremony felt different. The air in my house was lighter, the shadows less oppressive. I kept the pouch and stone with me at all times, and for a while the nights were quiet. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. They test us, especially those who forget the old ways. I hadn't forgotten, but I also hadn't been truly tested, not yet. It was a Thursday night when the call came in. Dispatch reported another family on the edge of the reservation was experiencing strange marks on their home, voices in the night, and their teenage daughter had gone missing after stepping outside to just check. Yazzie and I responded together, the drive silent except for the crunch of gravel under the tires and the low hum of the radio. The house was small, lights blazing in every window. The family huddled inside, terrified. The mother clutched a photo of her daughter, tears streaking her face. She heard her grandfather's voice, she whispered. She thought it was safe. She opened the door. The father showed us the porch, bare footprints leading away from the house, vanishing into the darkness beyond the yard. The air was cold, the wind sharp, and every instinct told me we were being watched. Yazzie and I followed the tracks, flashlights cutting through the night. The land felt different, the silence heavy and expectant. We moved slowly, careful not to speak, remembering the rules. The tracks led us to an old barn near the tree line, its door hanging open. Inside, the air was colder still, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. That's when we heard it, a knock 3 times, from the back of the barn. Then a voice, the missing girl's, calling for help. Yazzie's face went pale. "Don't answer," he whispered, "no matter what." But the voice grew more desperate, pleading, shifting from the girls to the mothers, then to my own. "Noah, help me, please." My grip tightened on the pouch in my pocket, the stone warm against my palm. I remembered the old woman's warning. Never speak, never answer, never step outside the circle. We backed out of the barn, moving in a slow, deliberate retreat. The knocking followed us, echoing from every direction, the voices growing louder, more insistent. The wind picked up, swirling dust and leaves around our feet. I felt something brush past me, cold and electric, and for a moment, I saw a shape, tall, thin, its face a blur of shifting shadows, standing just beyond the reach of my light. Yazzie began to chant softly, words in Navajo I didn't understand. I joined him, repeating the only prayer I could remember, my voice shaking but steady. The air grew thick, the darkness pressing in, and the knocking became a pounding, as if the night itself was trying to break through. Suddenly, the ground beneath us seemed to shift, the world tilting. I stumbled, nearly dropping the pouch, but Yazzie caught my arm, pulling me back. "Stay in the circle," he said, drawing a line in the dirt with his boot. "They can't cross if we hold the line." The voices screamed, a chorus of every loved one I'd ever lost, every fear I'd ever had. I closed my eyes, focusing on the warmth of the stone, the scent of sage, the steady rhythm of Yazzie's chant. The wind howled, the pounding reached a fever pitch, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the shadows had retreated. The barn was empty, the tracks gone. In the distance, we heard a faint cry, the missing girl, stumbling out of the darkness, dazed but alive. We ran to her, wrapping her in a blanket, whispering words of comfort and protection. Back at the house, the The family wept with relief, but the fear lingered in their eyes. Yazzie and I stayed until dawn, burning sage and repeating the old prayers, reinforcing the boundaries between what belonged inside and what waited outside. As the sun rose, I realized how close we'd come to losing everything. The rules had saved us, but only because we'd chosen to believe, to trust in something older and wiser than ourselves. Not everyone would be so lucky. The land would test us again, and next time the outcome might be different. Driving home, exhausted and shaken, I understood at last that courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was about knowing when to listen, when to hold the line, and when to ask for help. The night would always belong to the old ones, but as long as we remembered the rules, we had a chance to see the morning. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Faceless would come again, and that next time, someone might not make it back. The sun rose over the reservation, painting the land in gold and red, but the night's chill lingered in my bones. The missing girl was safe, but she barely remembered what had happened, just fragments of voices, a sense of being pulled by something she couldn't see. Her family clung to her, grateful and shaken, and I saw in their eyes the same haunted relief I'd seen in so many others. We'd survived, but something had changed. Yazzie and I stayed until the morning light filled every corner of the house. We burned sage, recited prayers, and made sure the family understood the rules. Never look at a stranger's face after dark. Never answer a voice in the night. Always keep the old protections close. The father thanked us, his voice rough with emotion. "We'll remember," he promised. "We won't forget again." Driving back, the land felt quieter, as if the night itself was resting. But I knew better than to believe the danger was gone. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. "They test us, but they never leave." The reservation was safer, for now, but the boundary between our world and theirs was thin as ever. At the station, I sat with Yazzie in the break room, the silence between us heavy but comfortable. He poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the table. "You did good," he said. "You listened. That's what matters." I nodded, thinking of all I'd learned. I'd come back to the reservation thinking I could solve every problem with logic and a badge. But the real justice here wasn't about arrests or reports. It was about restoring balance, helping families heal, teaching the rules and honoring the old ways. Sometimes that meant facing things you couldn't explain. Sometimes it meant accepting that not every story had a clean ending. I thought of the marks outside my window, the voices that still whispered in my dreams, the families who would always look over their shoulders after sunset. There was a cost to surviving here, a piece of yourself you left behind every time you faced the darkness and came back. But there was also a gift, the knowledge that you were part of something older, something that watched over you if you respected it. As I left the station, I paused to look at the land stretching out before me. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat echoed. I knew the rules now, and I knew why they mattered. The world was never truly safe, but as long as we remembered the old ways, we could keep the worst of the darkness at bay. I walked home in the morning light, the pouch and stone warm in my pocket, and promised myself I would never forget what I'd learned. The Faceless might come again, but I was ready. And this time I wouldn't be alone. Word spread quietly through the community. Some called me the officer who finally listened. Others just nodded with a new kind of respect. Yazzie started calling me the bridge, half joking, half serious, and the elders began to include me in their circles, sharing stories and warnings I'd never heard before. I found myself balancing paperwork and patrols with the quiet responsibility of watching for signs others might miss, strange marks, offerings left at crossroads, a neighbor's uneasy glance at sunset. Sometimes people would find me at the station or on the road, asking about the rules, wanting to know if the stories were true. I'd tell them what I could, careful to leave space for their own discoveries. The reservation had taught me that some lessons can't be given, only earned. But the land never truly rests. There are still nights when the wind sounds like voices, when the shadows move just a little too quickly, when the old warnings feel urgent and alive. I've started keeping my own notebook, adding new rules as I learn them, knowing that the mysteries here are far from finished. If you ever find yourself on the reservation after dark, remember, not every face is what it seems, and not every voice in the night is a friend. There are still faces we haven't seen, and warnings we haven't learned, and things waiting for someone to forget. Maybe one day, I'll tell you about the night the river ran backward, or the footprints that started at my window and vanished into the sage. Until then, keep your eyes open, trust the old ways, and if you have a story of your own, I'm listening. Out here, the night is always listening, too.